So first of all, when we do a leak detection, we start with the pool equipment. One of the things we notice here is on the returns, we have copper returns. Copper returns are always suspect, as it's a soft metal copper is, eventually they tend to get pinhole leaks. So we'll be checking that, putting that under pressure, making sure there's no leaks in the plumbing. As we come over to the pool, we're doing the visual part of our test. Eventually, we'll do a pressure test on all the plumbing. We'll dye test all the fittings. We'll check everything. But just visually, we can see there's a lot of structural issues. There's been a lot of movement. You can see the coping separating from the pool. You can see in there's a crack that goes down into the tile line. If you look above that 6-inch water line, you can see that this is not the original deck. It was raised to accommodate for this brick on top of whatever the subsurface was. So that surface was not tied in properly. And you can see that over in the deep end where you see the separation of the cracks because they didn't build that up correctly. We also see inside the pool surface, we see multiple cracks that have been patched. So they used a putty to fill those in, which will temporarily stop the leak. But as the material expands and contracts, as the water heats and cools, that will separate and will leak once again. We see the bond beam here where the tile is missing. That's obviously going to leak there. It's something that we'll be checking, as well as inside the light. A common place is leaking inside the conduit, so we'll be checking that as well.
How long do these type of repairs last typically, Rick?
So a epoxy patch like they did here is typically going to last a few months. Again, it depends on how much the water temperature heats up or cools down, because that's the issue. Is it's a rigid product but doesn't have great adhesion. So as the water heats up, it expands and contracts. The plaster will expand and contract, but at a much slower rate. And so you get that separation, and that's why it will once again leak. It's not a permanent fix. And really, that material, you can see, they just kind of applied it to the surface. They didn't address the underlying issues with the crack. So when our technician gets in the water, we use a portable air system so that rather than having to use a portable tank, he can use this. He has a regulator just like a diver would, and he can get in the pool. He has constant air, doesn't have to worry about running out of air, allow him to stay in the water as long as he needs to. That's one of the parts of leak detection that takes a lot of patience. When you're in the pool, you can't be moving around and rushing through it. You simply have to be patient and thorough to go through the entire structure to identify any leaks. So when our technician gets in the water, primarily what he's going to focus on when he gets in there is, first of all, he's going to look at any cracks, any visible cracks, any suspect areas. But the most important and common areas that he'll have to look at is the light, and then any extrusions that are in the shell, which includes the niche, the drain, returns, the skimmer. Anywhere where there's a penetration through the shell, it gets hydraulically sealed. That hydraulic seal can fail, and so he'll spend a little extra time there, as well as on the tile line. Those are the most common places for it to leak. And obviously, if there's a visible crack, that's something he's going to spend a little extra time addressing those areas. So here's one of the tiles. You see somebody trying to make a repair. They just used a lot of mud in there, but really we need to address the problem. This is just slapping on. Just putting this tile back on this damaged bond beam is not going to fix the problem. We have to kind of address what's going on underneath it, or the tile is going to continue to fall off. So if we looked at the mastic, that's that gray sealant that goes along that expansion joint. That's a pretty good indication as to how much soil movement we've had. You can see how much separation there's been. So that mastic expansion joint sealer allows it to flex. It's separated so much that it's actually pulled away, and you can see it's moved probably an inch away from where it originally was. So in this particular case, the way that the builder designed this pool is as an equalizer. You may be able to see it below that spillover on the spa, and that allows, when the spa is movement, water to go into the pool even aside from the spillover. Just allows for excess water to do that. When they're using the spa, the water is static, and so even though that's an open hole, it's drawing water and returning it at the same pace, so it'll still pretty much maintain that single vessel while they're heating it and won't be getting cold water infiltrating through the spa. So we see the tile there on the step. Some people call it trim tile or step edge tile. Oftentimes people do that. It's a clear delineation as to each step. So when people are getting in or out of the pool, they can see it clearly for safety reasons. It's just a preference. Most commercial applications will have that. In this case, you see the brown along the edge. Somebody put this tile on top of the plaster. This isn't after the fact. It wasn't done when it was plastered. And either they didn't use a white grout or it's so stained that it actually looks tan. That's not an ideal installation.
So, strange question to ask. How does algae get underneath the drain cover if there's constant suction underneath there?
Because that's not a direct suction skimmer. So it's not a direct suction skimmer. So it's tied in with the skimmer.
Okay.
So depending on how the valve, the equalizer valve in the skimmer is set, it may not really be drawing water, or potentially that drain could be abandoned and plugged off.
Another thing and a question I get a lot is sometimes a homeowner will have a single main drain or they won't have a main drain at all. Does it matter whether or not you have a main drain in the deep end of the pool? Because some people say, oh, I'm so worried about my kid drowning, even if I split it or bring it up for code, I don't want to take a chance. Is it better to have one or better not to have one?
So the idea of a main drain is you're allowing, again, it's a main drain is probably not an appropriate description or name for it. It's really just another suction port, but it allows you to draw water from the bottom of the pool. There's a couple advantages of it. Any debris that ends up in the bottom of the pool, if the main drain is functioning, it will actually pull that out. You don't have to physically vacuum it out. When you're trying to heat your pool, it also heats much more effectively if you can draw some water from the bottom. You get a better circulation both for heat as well as for filtration, a chemical. Dispersion is better by using a main drain, but it's not required. So you can abandon a main drain. The pool will still function, but by design, having a functioning drain is better. So here we see the technicians remove the light. Now he's dye testing both the niche as well as the cord goes in from behind the niche and checking that for leaks. And then when he puts the light back in, he'll reseat it properly, which it was not when we got here.
I see some white stuff inside the light niche there. Do you happen to know what that might be?
Could be anything. Sometimes there's a little bit of leftover plaster. Sometimes it's dirt. Usually it's a little bit of chunks of plaster. When he goes in there, he's going to clean that niche out to make sure there's no cracks or leaks. So anything that's probably been there since the pool was originally plastered, he's actually removing and cleaning it out so he can really inspect that niche thoroughly.
Can algae also get behind the light?
Yes, because water isn't really moving behind that niche. So whatever's behind there, for the most part, really kind of stays there. It's relatively stagnant. So during our visual inspection, we already spoke with the homeowner, but the patches that were improperly done, they're temporary at best. We told him that if they weren't leaking yet, that eventually they're going to be leaking again. They are in fact leaking currently, so they need to be addressed properly. Now, as far as leaks are concerned, oftentimes people get the impression that a leak is always going to be the size of your thumb, some big giant opening, and that's simply not the case. Most of the time, the leaks are the size of this die. It's just a very small leak. And of course, the deeper that leak is, the crack, wherever it is, or if it's in plumbing, it will, even though the size may be the same, the deeper it is, the more weight of the water will push it through faster. Whereas a surface leak of the same diameter will leak less, just because there's less pressure from the water. The same is true in a plumbing leak. If it's on the pressure side, after the pump, it will leak much faster than the same size hole on a suction side, just based on hydraulics. So right now the technician's getting ready to do a pressure test. So we're going to pressure test all the plumbing, the returns, the skimmer, the main drain, to go through everything and isolate it and identify whether the plumbing, which tells us whether the plumbing is leaking underground. If it is leaking, then we'll try and pinpoint where that leak actually is. So here in the equipment, it's not uncommon to find a GFI for the light, which is a GFCI is important. It's a safety device. So if there is water intrusion, it's going to trip that before there's an electrocution hazard. What's not as common, but it should be, is we should see a GFI on the pumps. So now that's required. It didn't used to be. So you would still often see them on the light, but not on the pump. If we replace a pump, if it doesn't have a GFI, we're going to install one. Again, it's for safety reasons. We want to make sure that all installations are going to be safe.
I'll have a lot of homeowners that will say, oh, I have a shutoff, which is this switch right here.
Mm-hmm.
So is the switch not allowed?
No, you can have a switch. That's
Okay.
just you could call it a service disconnect. It's just to shut it down to work on something.
Okay.
But that's not a safety device. That's not a GFI.
Got it.
That's merely a switch to shut it off. So right now the technician is checking the line between the skimmer and the main drain and making sure that that line is not leaking. So just for your reference, this diverter is not for that skimmer. That's an old style skimmer. So you can see after the technician pressure tested that line and then he blew it out, you can see all the debris that was stuck in that drain line. So even if it was active, it wasn't really drawing any material, and that stuff's probably been in there for quite some time.
How did all that debris get in there?
Yeah, because it's been in there for years, probably originally that diverter valve was turned so that it was pulling some from the main drain and was stuck in that line, never drew it all the way up. So when he induced air into that line, it blew all that debris out of that line. So now we've introduced air into this drain line between the drain and the skimmer. We've got it at 20 pounds, and we'll make sure that it holds there. If it doesn't hold, we know we have a leak somewhere between that line and the skimmer. If it holds, then we know that line is good.